Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. My name is Frank Dick. I chair the Global Athletics Coaching Academy, and it was the GACA who launched this idea of coaching matters. There's also something called the Coaches Club, so my apologies. This is Coaching Matters. It's a quarterly event. You can work that out from the first Tuesday in June. You can work that out for the throughout the quarter. And on each occasion, there is an Eastern Zones event first thing in the morning at a European level, and there's a Western event later in the day, which is the one that we're doing right now. The topics have mainly been, again, things that really matter to coaches and to coaching. And this time is the first time we've actually moved into a more practical context. And as everyone in the panel knows, we know that the coaches want to know more and more practical information because that's what our work is all about. So, without any further ado, let me introduce you to the beautiful Wendy Trevelyan, who is hosting us today.
Great. Thank you, Frank. Thank you all. I'm so happy to be here joining, and welcome to you all that are joining the forum and to our wonderful guests here. Um, this presentation we're going to have today is going to be led by, I'll moderate and Frank will assist in the question and answers. We want to ask you all that are here as guests visiting our forum, please drop any questions you have for our panelists into the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. We have a pretty full program today. Each of our guest presenters, our coaches, are going to do a presentation of their own about the topic. And then we're going to open it up for questions and dialogue back and forth from our coaches, with myself and Frank adding commentary and comments and things throughout the session. So thank you guys all for joining our Coaching Matters virtual forum that we're here today. Our topic is how to develop your athlete's technical model. And let me read a little bit of a clip to share with you what that topic is before we start and go into our presenters giving their perspectives. It all starts on a foundation of athletes, players being ready and prepared to learn physically, mentally, and emotionally. Their differences start from this point on. So the differences in our athletes start from this point on. For some, there's a clear picture of a core model of coordination, such as in athletics, throws, tennis, and golf, and so forth and so on. Some coaches build a model in parts. That's what our coaches here today will be talking about, how they develop their athletes' technical model. There's some adaptation to the model, of the model to the athlete, then to the athlete and its model. Some encourage movement exploration to find what fits best to address the technical demands of each event and in each individual sport. So here, our question to our panelists is from coaches: what do you do to create the right learning environment for your athletes? How do you develop your athlete's technical model? Joining me today, thank you all for being here. We have Craig Poole, Vern Gambetta, and Robert Jarvis. Of our three panelists today, we'll allow each of you to give your presentation, share the screen, share your dialogue, and we'll have each of you take your time and present your version, your perspectives of developing your athlete's technical model. And then we'll just start with some back and forth dialogue about that concept. Again, you all that are our guests, thank you for being here. Don't hesitate at any time, drop into the chat your questions so that we can get back to them, or even your comments, because we can all see your questions and your comments as we're going through. So with that said, if I can have in this order, we'll have Mr. Craig Poole, Robert Jarvis, and then Vern Gambetta will present, and I'll introduce each of you as you come up. First of all, Craig Poole, if you're going to be doing a presentation, you can go ahead and take over the screen now and pull up your PowerPoint if you are going to be presenting. And make sure you guys have your mics open. Craig Poole, he's the former head coach of BYU women's track team and a teacher of sports psychology. If you guys can join me in welcoming Mr. Craig Poole.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your introduction. The topic that we were talking about means a lot. It's one of those things that I have spent a lot of time trying to put together, to develop, and to create what I think is important. So, what does a coach do, and what areas do they carry in their basics? In other words, what is my job? My job, very simply, is to create an environment for championship performance. Now, that goes to the point or to the thought process that is for the individual. Each individual needs to be able to maximize their genetic potential. So keeping that in mind, that is where I like to start. In creating the model, what I try to do is from the first day that the young athletes come on board, I believe in the philosophy that was given by a former Green Bay Packers coach, who says you go back to the basics at least once a year. So I believe very much in starting to know every kid as best as I can, and the things that I need to know about every kid that comes under my tutorage is to know a little bit about how they perceive the world. And I very much want to know what their perception is, knowing that it's based upon their past experience, the influence that other people that they have dealt with have had upon them. I like to know a little bit about their culture. I like to know about the influence that they've had, what kind of an education they've had, and whatever their geographical region subculture how it has influenced them. Then, of course, I like to know a little bit about what kind of events they have done. And the very first thing that I do with a young group of athletes when I bring them together is I give them basic instruction as to what it is that I want them to do in whatever event that they're going to do. And I actually do not start coaching. Actually, I let them discover. For example, I give a kid a shot put, tell them a few basics to protect them from so they don't get themselves hurt. And I hope that they'll go out and play with it, throw it, handle it, take some movements, go through the ring, do these kinds of things. And then I do that with each individual event. And after they've had enough experience of going through those events that way, then they have something that they can identify with. They can identify with the weight of the ball or the movement pattern that is there. And the other thing that I try to look at is as I go through that portion with the skills, I also prior to that time will spend some time doing some basic testing. One of the tests that I have used in the past is called the quad test. Then I had a couple of other tests that I put together and put a scorecard to. But what they do is help me to become familiar with the movement patterns of each individual that I'm working with. And if you do not understand the movement patterns, then you probably don't have you don't know what to correct, or you don't know what to input, and you do not know what to provide them with. So that becomes the basics of the beginning of the program that I start to put together. I try to keep it very simple, extremely simple. And I also, in my communication with the athlete, is I try to only deal with where I want them to go. I don't try to tell them what they've done wrong. I tell them where I want them to go. In other words, I show them, I explain it, and then I always use the we terminology, not the you, not the me, not the they, always the we, because we're in this game together. And as a joint effort, we have to work through all the details in order to solve the issues. I do encourage question and answers. I like them to express to me what their feelings are, or what they're feeling in the performance of the skills that I'm teaching them. If we do not understand how they perceive, then it is very difficult for us to give them input that will be in a format that they can understand and they can apply. Sometimes I've seen some coaches preach the idea that it's my way or the highway, and do what I say and do what I do, but that doesn't always work. We'll put it this way. A lot of times we have football teams, basketball teams, and other teams that have a system, and the athlete has to fit the system,
Yeah.
you know? And so that is very confusing because that means that everybody has to adapt to one way and the coach doesn't make the adaptation. And my thought process is the coach is the one that has the knowledge, the experience, the background, and that coach has got to spend a little bit of time adapting their self and their skills and their approach, their verbiage, perceptions to what they want to have happen in the athlete. Now, when it comes time for technical skills, we understand there's a couple of things that are involved. The optimal approximation of the ideal is the nature of sports mastery. So if we do not understand the approximation or what that ideal is, and what the perception surrounding that individual would be, it's very hard to reach them in terms of making whatever corrections that we need to make in order for them to move forward. So I'm a very strong believer in the verbiage that we use, and I'm also a strong believer in the non-verbiage that we use in terms of helping that athlete understand what it is. In other words, here's an example. Way to go, or way to go. There's two different messages there on way to go. And the athlete interprets that verbiage to be positive or negative. And so I'm very much involved with you have to, as a coach, we have to modify our nonverbal to coincide with our verbal. So the message that's coming across to them is strong. That also denotes emotion, and also the verbiage we use is also the content. So speaking the language of the sport to the individual, because we are actually individually working with one after another individual athletes. Another side of it is that when we start, I also try to let them look at some film of some very, very fine athletes. That gives them a perception of what the outcome is going to look like in the things that they're trying to do. And so with that, I sometimes have coaches come up and say, well, then how about when you teach these kids, how about doing a lot of video filming to make the corrections? And I kind of frown at that because a lot of times what you see on video is not something you cannot teach, you cannot coach. It's a result of certain movement patterns. So when I watch video with athletes, I always watch the video in the teaching process to let them look at the continuity, the rhythm, and the timing more than the specifics of what's going on. So that becomes a very big cornerstone of the things that I talk about. Going back to testing. Now, because I have taught and I retired now, so I taught performance psychology, and then at the programs that I ran, I also had on board a performance psychologist. Dr. Keith Henshin served with me for many years in that capacity, and the consultant I use now is Dr. Don Green. But it is important when you talk about the psychology of sport that you have to have that kind of involvement with them as well. You need to have somebody there that can. There's a guy by the name of Clavora. He wrote a book back many years ago, and he called The Athlete, the Coach, and the Sports Psychologist. And in that book, it's very, very important to understand there's this communication network as far as how the coach interacts with the athlete and how the athlete interacts with the coach and how they interact with a third person, and so that the communication can be well-founded so that perception can be developed on a firmer foundation, and so that the athlete has should we say, a quicker route to learning the skills that we're trying to teach them. Again, one of the things that I like to look at in terms of teaching is the fact that I try to keep, as I said, simple, but I think even in the basics, I picture myself as trying to be a refiner of skills. Being a refiner of skills means that sometimes you have to take things step by step, and you have to spend a lot of time. I find that a lot of coaches try to cover too much too soon. And they try to put the whole skill together. I'm a big believer in whole part whole. I think that it's important that the athlete understands those skills. I think it's important that they then understand what happens when you break it down, and then when you put it back together in the continuity that it's supposed to be. So refining the skill becomes a very important part of it. And I think that when you refine skill, you're not just refining the whole of the skill, you're refining the individual part of the skill. Because here again, and in the preliminary presentation, we're assuming that the athletes are strong enough, I think. But a lot of times we find that our athletes, as we've gone through and done some testing, either psychologically or physiologically, that they're not strong enough. And so we have to make sure that they have that basic strength, both physically and emotionally and psychologically, in order to accept the items that we've been talking about. So that's kind of how I set it up. I try to set up the culture around that environment of perception, of communication, and of trying to have this umbrella of various things. And of course, you have all the elements that go with those elements. You have the knowledge of the athlete, you have, you have physiology, you have biomechanics, you have all those factors that go in that we have to be versed in, and that we have to identify and to express to the athlete in a way in which they will have an understanding of what it is that the outcome is going to be. So I hope that gives a kind of a general idea of where I'm coming from, and I hope that maybe the rest of us can play around with those ideas a little bit.
Very good.
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. Great opener. Very insightful comments and dialogue. And I know we all are taking some copious notes here so we can kind of jump in. So with that said, let's move on. And thanks for starting off the conversation, Craig. Let's move on now to Robert Jarvis. Robert Jarvis is the assistant coach of the men's jumps and combined events at the University of Arkansas. Robert, thank you for joining us. Share with us your perspective on this topic. How do you develop your athlete's technical model?
Awesome. Thank you, Wendy. And I gotta follow Coach Poole. Thanks, Coach Poole. But I actually took a little bit of a different approach for this. I prepared just a quick PowerPoint slide show, more so to give a little bit more perspective on my background with the hope of spurring more direct questions. So I'll glance over a couple of things that Coach Poole went over, but I'm hoping this will provoke questions. So let me show this. Start.
And remember our guest, while he's queuing up, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Rita, thank you again for joining us for this session. I see where you've dropped some questions in the chat. We will be able to get to them. Go ahead.
So is the PowerPoint live on your guys' side?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So bit of perspective. So first and foremost, I feel like, not this is going to be a contrarian view, but I feel like my scope is a little bit more narrow. For those of you that aren't familiar with the collegiate system in the US, I deal primarily with athletes from the age of 18 to 22. So my perspective on the technical model and how to fix, not fix, and that sort of thing is going to be coming from that perspective. So just going to touch a little bit briefly on my background, talk about my influences. And again, just prefacing this, that it's coming more from a collegiate background and a secondary point of view here in the States of the post-collegiate athlete. I say this in a loving way, where it's the ones that are good enough to be professionals, but as we know in athletics, money's not exactly out there to be taken by all. And then the part that I'm hoping is what's going to spur questions is I'm just going to touch on a few of the athletes I work with to talk about possibly their technical model and actually what we're working on now. I have videos I can show at some point. Anyway, so let me just move through this really quick. My background, I've been coaching at the college level for almost 20 years. You can see the universities, but for me, I cut my teeth. I was Brian Clay's teammate, luckily, at Azusa Pacific. So I learned from my coaches there at Azusa by basically carrying Brian's shoe bag around the world when he was going. So my background primarily is the combined events. My coaching tree, Brian's had 3 coaches at the time, Kevin Reed, Mike Barnett, Rainer Ryder. My other mentor that I'm very close with is Jeremy Fisher. And then I worked for Lauren Seagrave at IMG Academy. So from those 5 gentlemen, you can kind of get an idea of where my background will come from. I won't go through these names, but these are the other influences. These are other big college coaches here in the States. But again, try to model my train of thought behind them. Okay, so what I was getting at, for me, it's very challenging in the sense that and as a collegiate coach, we wear many hats. So before I even get the opportunity to do all those things that Coach Poole talked about, we have to first evaluate a 14 to 17-year-old at the high school level. Second, attempt to recruit them. If we get down the road, getting to know the family and the young, for me now, I only coach the men, young man, their family, then get them to sign a letter of intent to our university. I'll finally have the opportunity to get to coach them. So, that being said, once the young man does get to college, we'll usually have anywhere from 4 or 5 years to work with them. The second point I put, don't crash the Ferrari. One of my old bosses by the name of Mike Maynard at UCLA, he said, he's like, look, at this level, you're going to have a lot of talented athletes to work with. There's a reason that they're good. And I said, okay, I guess that makes sense as a young coach. And he goes, if you had the opportunity to afford a supercar of your choice, you don't want to take the car out and just pin it all the time. You're not going to drive the F1 car every single day of the week. So it really taught me to understand that the days to go up and down, training theory and that sort of thing. And I'll get back to that. But the thing that I want to stress, and again, from our perspective, is that what I have to constantly remind myself on, I'm blessed. Like I get to work with some of the best young men and women from around the world just because of the institution that I'm at. And I have to remind myself all the time that that young person was very talented before I had the opportunity to work with them. And that young person has those intangibles that they have that made them what they are. And so that being said, trying to apply a specific model to them may or not be in their best interest. And so that's kind of where the direction I was going to take with the rest of this discussion. So old adage, there's many ways to skin a cat. So like I said, for me, when these young men come in, I adapt my model to the specific athlete's strengths. And then once I identify their deficiencies, at that point, I'll try to mold them to do the proper things inside that model the best they can, and hopefully do attain those championship performances. I'll glance over these pretty quick, but here are just 4 professional athletes that I work with. And I mean, I'm not going to read the screen. You guys can go through, but the first one's Michelle Affley. She just finished 4th this past weekend at GOTSIS. But for discussion, one of the technical challenges we had with her, she had patella tendinosis when I first arrived at the University of Miami. And the doctors at that time suggested that she should move away from the heptathlon. And I was like, you know what? Heptathletes combined eventers are pretty good athletes. Let's try to change takeoff legs. Both her and Amy Dean, my old boss, they both looked at me like I was crazy. But over the course of a year, Michelle not only learned how to jump off the new side, her previous PB on her, I say old leg, she was a right foot jumper in long jump, high jump, and left foot lead leg. So everything was off the right leg. So that patella tendon was almost blown to pieces. So that first year she ended up jumping, I believe it was 174. And her previous PB was 177. And then she's jumped now over 181 off the new side. And again, we can get into that. It's been feast or famine with that. The next one I'll touch on is Kieran McLeod, Jamaican long jumper. He stayed here in Fayetteville to train with me with the coaching transition. For him, what we can talk about is just the change of his full run. Kerry is extremely fast. I can get you guys data if you want it, but he decided that if he wanted to medal this summer in Tokyo and obviously hopefully in LA, he would need to move his run from 18 to 20 steps. So he does a 20-step skip in. So that's the little technical adjustment we did with him. The last two to talk about is Russ Robinson. He's a US triple jumper. And just for him, he was one of those for the younger, how I say, coaches out there that coach younger athletes. When I recruited him, on paper, he wasn't that good relative. He only jumped 1466. I say only 1466 and 746 out of high school. But for our level, that's pretty substandard. But by the time he graduated from Miami, he had jumped just shy 8 meters and over 17 meters and made his first Olympic team last year. So for him, can talk about progressions as far as remedial to mastery, as far as triple jump and that sort of thing. And then the last one I'll talk about is Scotty Vines. He's currently on the team here at the University of Arkansas with me. He was the under 20 gold medalist last summer in Lima. And the reason I bring him up, it has been a very, challenging thing in a good way with Scotty. He had a PB indoors of 2 meters 29, which is wild for a 19-year-old. But in the span of 2 weeks, I managed to coach him down to 211 at the SEC championship and the NCAA championship. And the reason I laugh a little bit tongue in cheek was that things went sideways really quick when we started making little adjustments to his model. I'll just touch on real quick. His high school coach was a pupil of Cliff Revelto, a guy by the name of Matt Hemingway. He was a silver medalist in Athens in the high jump. So imagine, like Coach Poole touched upon, a young man coming to college, never touched a weight before. And I can't convert off the top of my head, but his high jump width from the standard was plus or minus 9 feet 6. So that's what, less than, gosh, I can convert that. Anyway, that being said, he had an extremely tight turn. And so with his strength levels not catching up with the centripetal forces he was producing, he was blowing through his run, running at the bar, and that sort of thing. So all that being said, it's been a humbling learning experience to say the least. And just the optics from outside looking in, people not understanding how a young man goes from jumping 229 to 211 in a couple of meets. And so me as a coach trying to run interference and being like a protective shield from him, because like Coach Poole touched upon, social media is not the best of things for young people. And so just perspective, self-worth, self-image, that sort of thing, it really hit him. And I mean, if I'm being honest, he lost his confidence for a good 2 months. But that being said, he's trending in the right direction. He qualified for the NCAA outdoor meet next week, and he's been jumping well over 223 in practice. So hopefully puts it together next week, makes for a good story, and then we'll see what happens this summer. But all that being said, I just want to bring up those athletes just to hopefully spur questions. But that is it on my end. I'll give the screen back.
Great, Roberts. Thank you very much. Very good opening and good presentation. I like that you talk about adapting your model to your athlete's strengths. And I know we'll talk more about that in the dialogue back and forth. Very good job. Our next presenter on our topic, Vern Gambetta. Will you be sharing the screen, Vern, or will you just be sharing dialogue? You're muted. And while he's unmuting and he's getting himself set up to present, Vern Gambetta.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Vern Gambetta is the founder of Gain Network and considered to be the father of functional sports training. So, Father, share with us your perspective.
Okay, if I can, this is what I was, somebody help me here.
No worries, take your time.
Bottom
Desktop.
middle, share.
Okay.
And then share screen, and then it'll share your screen.
What's that dialog box that just came up? Oh my gosh.
That's okay.
Very reassuring, Vern, I have to say, because I can't even begin to tackle this stuff.
Well, yeah, this.
Vern, go down to the bottom of your screen with your mouse, and then there should be a row of buttons that show up. From that row of buttons, then you should see a button there that says share.
Yeah, I did that. And that's what comes up.
Okay, so a window's going to come up. Once that window is up, then you should be able to select a screen that you want, and then if you've got a PowerPoint that there's a little blue button or a little button at the bottom of that to say go ahead and share. So the window that comes up, Vern, there'll be another little button at the bottom of that window that you'll be able to hit
it's not working for some reason. You know what? I don't want to monopolize a bunch of people's time. There was just some visuals that I thought would be helpful, and I'll talk off of those. Because I think you can imagine, and I'm going to take not necessarily a different point of view, but a little bit of a longitudinal point of view. I've been coaching for 56 years, and I counted up the other day when somebody counted it up for me. I've worked with 21 sports at the international level, and of late working with swimming and probably the best cricket player in the world, and never getting far away from athletics. So the thing that we start here is, what is your technical model? And last weekend, I went to the California State meet for the first time since 1985 with no skin in the game. I didn't have an athlete. I wasn't recruiting. And I was thinking about this presentation, and I thought the whole time, my gosh, look at all these various ways of accomplishing exemplary performance. And I kept thinking, well, I'd like to go up to the coach. What is your technical model? How do you develop your technical model? So basically, and Frank knows this story, going back, when I started coaching, the world record holder was Igor Taravanesian in the long jump. Lynn Davies from Great Britain was the gold medal winner. And Taravanesian did some interesting things with his technique, and Lynn Davies studied his technique. On those days it was film, which wasn't readily available, and watched him in person. And his coach, Frank, helped me. They looked at it and they were trying to copy what he was doing. And they religiously copied it, and they just couldn't get it. So Taravanesian spoke out of meet. He spoke really good English, and Lynn Davies went up to him and said, "Igor, I need some help. I'm really trying to figure out what you're doing." And he said, "Yeah, I've been trying to correct that too for the last 2 years." So, this is what you have to be careful of. And I found myself, I didn't hear that story until about 3 years into my coaching career, and I spent way too much time with my athletes. In this case, it was junior high, and for the rest of the world, that's roughly 12 to 15. And we did a lot of work studying sequence photos, still photos and sequence, because that was available. There was a book by Ken Doherty called Track and Field Movies on Paper, which was drawings. Bring that out to practice, and the kids would look at that. And with my first paycheck, I bought a Kodak M95 projector, $450 then, regular 8. No, Super 8, Super 8. And I thought it was really cool because we could go frame by frame by frame by frame. And so the kids would come to my classroom at noontime, and I'd show them, that today would be high jump, tomorrow would be long jump. Well, what started to happen, I realized once we did that, they looked like they were jumping, running, throwing frame by frame. And I go, wait a minute, we gotta bring this together. And I love the word that, and this is what I've come to with the athletes I'm working with today. It's about rhythm, tempo, timing, rather than frame by frame and positions. And then the other thing that I think we tend to forget sometimes with the technical model is that the technical model must respect the laws of motion. Gravity isn't going to change, because we're going from event to event. And I know, and you say, well, I know that's obvious. Well, then why do we do some of the things that we do? We're trying to really cheat laws of motion, and rather than take advantage of them. And the other thing is, and this goes back for me more in the last 20 years actually than the first 3 or 4. I just took it for granted because the kids in the late 60s and early 70s, the kids and the adults had much, much better movement skills, fundamental movement skills. They had physical education, they'd had gymnastics in school as part of daily physical education. And I think we have to remember that the technical model must be built on fundamental movement skills. And that's what I saw. I've particularly focused in on the shot put this week in boys and girls shot put on the preliminaries. And it was obvious that a couple of these kids just didn't have fundamental body awareness to be able to try to do the technique that they were doing. So that was something that I thought of. Once you decide on the technical model, and I put this on a coach to coach thing that Frank has, do you teach to the technical model or you teach from the technical model? And I looked at it again historically, and I look at colleagues in that. I think a lot of people teach to the technical model, again, the ideal. So you look at Alenka now in the discus. So I saw, and Krauser, I saw a couple of boys trying to imitate the little adjustment that Krauser was trying to make and anything. And I really think, and I really want to be emphatic about this, I do think you do teach from the technical model, and that's what Craig said too, that you adapt the model to the athlete you have and not fit them to that. And then this goes back to, I count Frank as one of my mentors, and something that he wrote, and it was presented at the Meadowbank Convention in the early 70s. You have a basic technical model coupled with basic conditioning. So if you're coaching junior high, high school, age group track, it's a basic technical model supported by basic conditioning. Okay. And then you have an advanced technical model with specific advanced conditioning. Okay. And I think of a technical model not so much as a rigid model or structure. I think of it, if you can imagine, a framework, okay, that I'm building upon. In my backyard here, there's a trellis, and we planted some things, and it's starting to grow and grow into those things. And I look at athletes historically that I've coached, and I look at this cricket player now, and she has a tremendous framework, obviously best in the world at age 34. But we have to go back, and her reference point has become the javelin throw, and what javelin throw, what things are done in training, and what things technically. She would be a great javelin thrower, by the way. So you look at move on, and I love the concept of shapes. It's something that I started seeing, and I heard this first with a swim coach I was working with about 25 years ago. And so you know, what shapes can you make and what shapes can't you make? And Craig said, give them the shot put. Yes, the concept of ecological dynamics, where you give them, you show them, and you let them explore. But I think if you take a step back to fundamental movement skills and shapes, and then you look at posture, I say 3 Ps: postures, poses, and positions. And then the athlete starts to become comfortable with how all those postures are connected, and the rhythm and timing uh, is set up with that, you know. And then the other thing is the whole concept here of the technical model is how well can you make shapes, but the key is what? The flow, the rhythm, the tempo. How well can you change shapes? How effectively can you change shapes? And so what I find by using this concept, the athlete is now not looking at parts, they're looking at connection of parts to the whole, which I think really sets them up a lot better for being able to progress. And again, the relationship here, even with 7th, 8th, 9th graders, is a partnership to develop and how they feel, you know, and words create images and images create action. Okay. And now there's one other thing that I think we neglect with the technical model. Those of you that work with, sprinters, 400 to 400, middle distance, is race modeling. So again, the kids tend to look, you know, there's a lot of track on TV. They look at what happens, and they're trying to imitate that. And I think that one of the key things is is teaching race distribution and teaching distribution of effort in addition to running mechanics. And that's a daily process done usually at the end of practice, when you're just I hate the term cool down, I call it reset. So they do that. And I saw some really good, because I know I was sitting behind the parents of the boy who won the 400 meters in 46 point and has run 45 this year, second year of track, played all sports until his junior year. And somebody who worked with him, his coach, has done a masterful job of teaching him race modeling. So he's very efficient in his distribution of effort. And then last but not least, anybody that knows me, I'm always going to recommend books. The one, Frank, I don't know if you can still let us know where to get this, but a terrific book that you did, 53 years ago, right around that time, called Butt First, about all the basic elements. And it's anybody that I coached at the junior high or high school level knows that book, because they saw photocopies. And then the other one is You Haven't Taught Until They've Learned, which is John Wooden's Principles. And then Doug Lemov's book, Practice Perfect. And another book that has very few allusions to sport. It's Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning, by 3 professors at Washington University. And that is a Bible. I mean, it's as contemporary could be, in terms of ecological dynamics and all of that. So those are my thoughts on the technical model, and I appreciate the opportunity to present.
No, Great, Vern. Great. I appreciate it. Frank, you have your hand up, and let's go ahead and start the dialogue about the concepts that you guys have presented for us. Frank, you want to go ahead and start us?
Yep, we've got two questions, one by one, but just to come back to the question that you already mentioned from Samuel, Coach Samuel from Nigeria, is to the panel, how do you create the right learning environment? Now, I know you've all touched on it, but could you summarize that for Coach Samuel? It's a good question.
Well,
I guess,
go
okay.
ahead. No, Craig.
No, I was just going to say for me, again, in the setting that we are part of, depending on where we're in the year, it's just, again, track. I joke with the college kids, athletics is a sport that technically isn't fun. It's difficult to train. It's hard on the body. It's not like for going backwards, a lot of my contemporaries I grew up with played baseball. I think we would all agree you could probably go out there, play a pickup game of slow pitch softball or that sort of thing and not injure yourself. I don't think anyone on this panel is going to go out there and try to let loose on 100 meters or 400 meters, right? So the reason I say all that is that for here, training's hard. A positive environment is like a big thing. And so what I tend to do is our older upperclassmen on the team, I make it their charge just through the environment, the team culture, to really take the younger ones under their wing and just show them just a nurturing environment. I just think there's so much negativity out there across the board. I'll touch on it later. Just I think social media for young athletes is probably one of the worst things they could do, just from a false sense of self-image, or even on the other way, just people out there just taking people down. But from making a positive learning environment and just really just getting to know the kids and just speaking to them, not just the group as a whole.
I would say that you try to, I mean, obviously when you're first teaching, I'm going back to teaching. I taught every kid and boy in the school at Lacumba Junior High 5 periods for 6 weeks of every event in track and field. And we tried to make it a playful environment. And today, you do think, you know, the more it can be a playful environment. Run, jump, and throw is the national. I have a 4.5-year-old granddaughter, and watching her explore is an education again. And so I think what we need to do is make it fun, and again, it's dance like too. I mean, more and more in my old age, I never could dance. I'd take about a 6-pack of beer or something to get me to be able to dance. But understanding that rhythm and tempo and letting them express themselves. This is a means for you to express yourself through motion, through your event, instead of becoming really robotic. I think that's the mistake. The biggest mistake that I've made in my coach's career is creating robots as opposed to dancers. So anyway, yeah.
Craig, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. I look at it this way. It depends on what age, of course, that you're working with, whether they be pre-adolescents or teenagers or college type of things. But most kids want to belong to something. So there's a belonging influence. And so your peer culture plays a major role in creating that environment. To be welcomed in, to be part of, to make a contribution to, are all the factors that we as coaches have to help create in order for these athletes to want to be with your group. I coached 6 years in junior high school, 10 years in high school before I went to the university for 30 years, and plus it's been post-timed with international level athletes. Even with those different groups, there is an element of belonging to something, even if it is your just belonging to your coach and your trainers and your training group, if you want to encompass the trainers, the psychologists, the nutritionists, and all the people you put in at the upper level. But one of the things that I did when I was coaching in high school is that when kids were interested in coming out for the team, I would actually go to the junior high schools and I would test and have the junior high coaches test every kid to find out who had the talent. When they came to the high school, I made sure that they were identified immediately when they came as a sophomore, that they were here, that we had a program for them. If they were in other sports, fine. But when they're through with those sports, come with us and be part of our group. I always recruited the in-group, so to speak, the cheerleaders, the student body officers, those types of people, so that they knew that that was an involvement of, they were accepted by other people, the people that were identified. I think that when I was between classes, I taught biological sciences. So between classes, I stand out in the hallway, and as kids walk by, if a kid walked a proper way, I'd invite them out for the track team. Come and join the in-group, be part of what we are. So I think that that is as much importance as to the mechanics of what we are doing in the sport itself, is the involvement of belonging, of meeting their needs, so to speak. And each one of those kids, as you draw them in, they will express to you what their basic needs are. Why are they there? What do they want to learn? Why do they want to be part of this group? And then that becomes our challenge as our personal coaching adaptation to each individual to help them to identify those particular outcomes that we're trying to help them to achieve. Again, achieving their genetic potential in all aspects that we can think of.
Great. Wonderful dialogue. Before we go into one of our next questions, Vern, our guests are asking if you can drop into the chat the titles of the books that you mentioned. If you can jot that into the chat or get
You know
that.
what? I'm going to give you all my email,
There we go.
and it's G as in go. Well, I guess I could put it in the chat. Sorry, I'm just TS coach at gmail.com. See, oh, I got to know how to spell coach, right? At
Take your time.
gmail.com, and I will send you the presentation. I will send you a PDF of the presentation, and then I will. And in fact, there's probably 6. Those were the top ones that I picked. If somebody needs to get to something right away, and then there's some supporting ones, I'll give them to you. Some of you know me. That's my thing too, is
Great.
reading. So anyway,
Okay,
so I'll
Vern.
do that if you don't mind. So I hit return. There you go. So
Okay,
please.
Vern, you've actually put me on the spot now because I've been promising to reprint
Gotta
that
do
book
it.
for quite some time.
I'll help you, Frank. Need
Oh,
be.
yes, please.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
No, needs to
Can
be
I-
done, Frank, because again, and I'm not trying to toot, I don't need to toot your horn, but books, and again, I've spent incredible amount of time in the last year because I'm not coaching day to day, and I have a lot more time on my hands. Somebody said you're retired. I'm semi-retired with the emphasis on semi, and the latest research that I read was, again, and the biggest trend that's happening in school that's very, very negative is a moving away from books and tactile things that you can feel. So my copy of But First, it's my second copy. You can still see it, but the other one is tattered. Okay, because the kids would take it, they could take it home, they could do whatever they wanted, show it to their mom and dad, or whatever, because they were into it, and that. So books are important. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for that, Vern. Okay, can I now ask my question? I'm going to put the guys on the spot here because we've mentioned basics. We've mentioned being ready before you mentioned the foundation fitness, if you like, Vern, that goes with foundation basic skills and so on. But just how basic are these things? Let me give you an example of why I'm asking the question. I studied discus throwing for quite a while and was fascinated by the former East German approach. Forget all the drugs and stuff, folks. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how to teach and how to develop. And they did not put a discus in any athlete's hand to begin with. They tried to create games. And the most basic one, I'm going to offer this as my opinion, and you're quite free to contradict. The basic one was balance on the floor. And so what they would do is stand the athlete on 2 feet, and then, or if there were a right-handed thrower, they would hop up and down, very small hops, as they turned round to 180 degrees, and then but by that time they'd moved their other foot back, and then a number of small hops and so on. And it was a simple little game, and they played music to it and so on. Because if you think about it in throws, and maybe I'll elaborate on this a little bit further. If you think about it in throws, it's all about balance. If your feet are not in the right position,
Right.
if you're not controlling things from the ground, you're going to be in trouble, right? And so my question to you guys is, what do you consider to be basics? Maybe you don't want to do them in all events, but just on a couple. And just added to that, in terms of basics, Rita Engelbrecht, who's joined us here, she very often raises the issue of gait.
Amen. That's the basis of everything.
And I mean, how are you going to make a sprinter if their feet are somewhere between 10 to 2 and Charlie Chaplin? How are you going to create a sprinter? And that, to me, seems to be a basic. So over to you guys. Where do you start with your basics? Because if we're going to make people ready, they've got to be able to do the exercise and the movements.
I will say quickly, gait is the cornerstone of function. Gait is the cornerstone of function. You start from the ground up, and it's bipedal. And then look what happens with the arms. You know, if the arms aren't working in opposition, okay, and then you build upon gait. And then there's all the other things: balance, coordination, awareness, all of that. But in the throws, you know, and you look at, yeah, that, I mean, amen. That's all I could say. And so it's part of you know, it's part of warm up. It's part of reset. It's you know, and that absolutely. And that's the genesis of a lot of the patterns of injuries. And being able to, now I know it's hard when you're in northern climates, but doing as much as you can barefoot, you know, too. So they learn because of the sense receptors in your feet.
That last point is really good, Vern, because Bondarchuk, way back in time, he insisted that his hammer throwers trained in, you know, these very thin-soled plimsolls, the gym shoes that we used to have, so that they could feel the circle. So they could feel the circle. And where I'm coming towards in this is the whole teaching development program that was mentioned by Craig to begin with, because this is it. But what I'm trying to get at initially, what are the parts? What are the parts we're looking at? Sorry.
Well, the parts that I see is that we're leading towards functional movement, which means that the whole body is kind of in tune with itself from the ground up, as mentioned. I know one of the things that we tried to get at this very idea with is that in our conditioning program, we would have all kinds of circuits that we would run, and a lot of it had balance, like front scale, back scale, side scale, like gymnastics would do in track and field. Walking a line, hopping a line, running backwards. I think that's one that's missed a lot, is to run backwards. I think to run backwards is a big moment for young people to understand the coordination that's involved there, because there is some mechanics that can be taught there. I think that you have to incorporate all of those issues in turning, spinning, jumping, hopping, jumping and spinning, hopping and spinning. All those factors that you can think about have to be incorporated, because granted, in our public education and our foundational education today, where we had reading, writing, arithmetic, and physical activity, we no longer have the physical activity. And as a result, we have kids who do not have body awareness, as mentioned before, and or the strength. I look at the kids just in my neighborhood. They do not have the strength or the training for most of their coordination skills. It's a shame. I went to a track meet not too long ago, and I saw some people that are at a high level that their skills were horrible, even though they succeeded because they had the ability to muscle through it, if you wish. So I think, yes, I think it's got to be incorporated as part of the whole picture. You've got to involve it not only as a conditioning component, but probably as a component to the event itself.
Right.
Crawling.
To
Crawling.
piggyback.
Let me interject one other thing. Crawling too. So gait and then crawling.
Oh,
See,
yes.
so part of my standard warm up across sports, you'll Summer McIntosh, who holds 3 world records, everybody said we know where her program came from in Paris because she was crawling to warm up on the side of the pool and doing mini band and walking gait stuff. And so and people say, well, that's just for your throwers. No, I saw some distance runners down in Clovis last week that needed to crawl. They had no idea of opposition, and connecting. And everybody wants to do core work. If you want to do core work, crawl. Don't do sit-ups, crawl.
You
Sorry,
may
I
want
got fired
to
up.
point along that same line. Crawling is the basics of rehabilitation of dyslexic situations.
Absolutely.
And you have to go through the crawling procedure to have the coordination, the skills, and
To read.
the hemispheriality of the brain to operate as it should, which is
And then,
congruent
sorry,
of the type picture.
then adding
Go
another
ahead.
layer to that is crab walks.
Crab
Like,
walks.
Yeah.
same thing, just coordination, all that. But
Yeah,
I was
all
just,
of that,
I
yeah.
agree with everything you guys said, but just to piggyback real quick, for me, like specifically general prep, I feel a lot of the capacity work that I get in is actually during the warm up. And same thing, I'll give my email address. I have no problem sharing it because it's like, for me, it's a catchphrase. Like, I am literally a helicopter. I watch everything from before they start the warm up to every rep that I can. I flight the groups so that I can watch everything. Because again, it's the athlete's success is dependent upon my guidance, right? So if the warm-up's terrible, the run might be terrible. If the running mechanics are bad, that approach down that runway is probably going to be awful. So not only is there a cause and effect in the reps, there's a cause and effect, in my opinion, to how one coaches. Because if you let the little stuff get by, it can be catastrophic long term for that young athlete.
Well, I
I
would
think there's-
agree with you that general warm up, it doesn't have to be long, but there's backward running, there's karaoke's, there's all of that stuff. And then depending on the workout that day, there's 3 or 4 crawls. There's a crawling series. Okay. And then in intra workout, I think the mistake we make is, as a prep for that particular technical work we're doing that day, to go back to, like Frank said, just some fundamental movements. It only takes, and what do you do between throws? You got 6 kids in high school. So I hate to, lines, laps, and lectures kill us. So I want them doing something and coaching each other. So,
And to use Vern's term, like for me, for example, to high jump, if the athlete for me has a bad run, bad initiating their curve or their turn, I'll literally, same thing. They don't need a dissertation. I'll tell them, go run some tight circles, feel that position, put your body where it needs to be. And then one thing I left out before, being into college, we have the luxury of a lot of technical toys. And so it's just, we have force plates, we have dynasties, you know what I mean? So it's just those, anyway, but that being said, we get to see symmetry versus asymmetry, than just working in partnership with our training room and strength and conditioning staff. It's a full run thing. But back more towards Frank's question on skills versus other things. So for me, I'm a big proponent. I make my combined event athletes actually train with the other event groups. I just feel like from their peers seeing their other peers do things, I think creates a good learning environment and synergy from that standpoint. But again, we can maybe go into that later. But
can I make one comment too? Beware of symmetry. The body is fundamentally asymmetrical, and everybody has, at your level and above, has force platforms. And oh my God, I'm a left-footed jumper. I was
right.
my left leg takeoff in all my events when I did decathlon was left leg. Do you think there's an asymmetry there? Do you think there's a reason why I went to my left leg? But your trainers and your strength coaches are going to try to make them even. Watch out, guys. Watch out. I'm fighting
I agree
that
with you.
all
One
over.
of the
Fight that every week.
One of the things
Go ahead.
one of the things I wanted to bring out in this discussion, and you guys are doing it brilliantly, is that we actually need to learn multiple movement patterns before we begin to try to be specific. We know, for example, from research that those athletes in any sport, those athletes, before they get to specialization, if they've done multiple events, not just the combined events in our sport, but they've done other sports as late as possible, about 16, 17, they are more likely to be successful in their senior years than those athletes who've not done that.
Yes, absolutely.
It brought that stuff, and what you've just been discussing reminds me again of colleague Rita Engelbrecht, who's Chudidia, when she said every athlete should be doing gymnastics of some kind at some point before they begin to specialize. Are you guys all comfortable with that idea?
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, I can say that when I was in the collegiate system, we actually fielded every fall as a conditioner. We played in the intramural league in flag football. Now, I lost a few athletes along the line in that because of injuries, but just the same, it was a very good developer for acceleration and agility and movement patterns. Eye-hand coordination for catching the ball, throwing the ball. I mean, it was great. And we won the league. Sometimes we had 2 teams in the league. So, I mean, you've got to have that kind of a breakup, I think, as far as the expression of skills in multiple ways and multiple sports.
Right.
So-
And to
so-
Coach Poole's part, we found a safer version of it now. Same idea, but we actually play ultimate frisbee in the fall.
Yeah.
Same idea, a lot less contact most of the time.
Yeah,
Most of the
right.
time.
So folks, what this is leading towards is it was something that was actually raised this morning by Cliff Mallet, and that is we're putting 2 things together. When I had the good fortune to be working with an international team sport, it was very evident that the players who'd come from the best players in the country were arriving in the national squad. And the bit is, a lot of them were there simply because they were more talented and gifted than the athletes who were not there.
Yeah.
What that meant was a lot of them were short on the basics, which never showed up when they were playing national sport, but which would certainly show up when they got into senior sport, into international sport. Now, linking that together with what Cliff was saying, the model that some athletes will have been taught when they're young may not be compatible with what they need when they're older.
Right.
So over to you now, guys, changing people from where they are, or to use John Wooden's expression, to take people from who they are to who they're capable of becoming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who wants to go first on this one?
You do. You go first.
All right. So, as you guys can guess, I deal with this every day. And the thing is, this might be a long-winded answer. From my standpoint, I have the luxury of recruiting who I want. And so in that sense, it's no secret in the US system, there's certain cities and clubs and places to avoid just because, they might be over-raced, over-jumped, or not taught properly. On the other side of it, on the athletes that I do get, and this is in the chat, I can get back to that and answer it later. The unfortunate part about the NCAA system is it's lost on a lot of schools and coaches that a lot of these kids want to make their national teams. A lot of these kids want to put on a senior vest when they go back home to Europe or overseas. And so it's just, oftentimes people will take what they can get. They score their points. For those of you that don't know, the national championship meets at the college level, they're considered score meets. The mark that they're capable of is good enough for that, but the coach makes the mistake to not teach them what's going to take them to, like what Frank just said, to what they're capable of. And so I'll spend multiple years, if I have the luxury of a quadrennial, trying to set up a plan to fix what's most critical and work my way down the line. But again, it's just identifying what it is going to take to not only get them to be a national champion for us, but what's going to get them to make their senior teams on their own.
I would say the place to start is what's fixable. So that, again, watching this meet this last week, and I thank God I'm not coaching in college anymore. And I look at these kids, and one particular athlete signed with a university where my best friend works, and he's got his work cut out for him. She won state, she's been coached. I would basically say incorrectly. Her whole rhythm of her approach is all messed up and things like that, So, but that being said, that's the toughest thing, you guys. I'll share with you, and I think Craig and all of us gray-haired guys can say that the toughest thing is changing. I mean, Summer McIntosh, who won 3 gold medals in swimming and set 3 world records, and that she had to change her freestyle mechanics, and there's a lot of technique in changing strokes. And I'll tell you, I wasn't her swim coach, but I was a dryland coach, and I'd be there. But she had to buy in, and everybody had to buy in, and it was a situation in that respect where the mistakes were not, I want to say tolerated, but no, Summer, we got to do that over again. We got to do that over again, and it is a really difficult process. And I think sometimes the last thing I will say is we said this earlier, is what we perceive as a mistake. I know I've been too quick sometimes to intervene and say, let's see, is this their movement signature? What happens at the point of takeoff? What happens at the point of release? Are they getting in the correct position, even though they look funky doing it? And if you ever follow the story of Bernie Wagner with Dick Fosbury, he made him jump straddle all week, and then he could jump the flop and if had he not done that, where would we now? The world record would still be 7, 6 3/4 or something like that, So it's the hardest thing, again, having worked with multiple sports and not track is highly technical, but say pro baseball and things like that. Boy, it's creating an environment, and using. And again, it comes back to what everybody said too, what Craig said too, is being able to work hand in hand with that athlete. One last, I will say, like with Elise Perry, I started working with her when she was 31, and all these people had been telling her, you need to change your approach. And if you follow cricket, there's a lot of you are from Commonwealth countries. There's one male and the other one that have this idiosyncrasy in her approach. She jumps, and everybody tried to get rid of it. And I looked at a bunch of film, I talked to her, and then she came and spent 10 days with us. And I go, Elise, we have to just get you stronger in those positions so that you can handle the forces that you need to be able to execute your technique. And don't listen to the naysayers. And her velocity went up 4 miles per hour, and and she's healthy again. I mean, it doesn't mean she could have been a javelin thrower. It could be the same thing. So yeah.
Okay, Craig?
Yeah, the comment I want to make is that in all these changes we make, we have to understand about the continuity and the commonality that we share between the events and the event styles. But one thing that I found out is every athlete that I've ever coached that comes up through the ranks to the collegiate level and even those beyond, they have a tendency to revert to what they did before, which was successful for them. So in the change process, it really takes a total commitment, a buy-in, as Vern said, to where you're going to go with the skill.
Yeah.
And then some of the quirks that we have, as Vern was suggesting, the biggest quirk I have is long jump approach.
Oh God.
That is that
Awful.
See my hair? That's what color it is because of the long jump approach. And that is that you've got
We
to
have a flawed technical model that we teach in the United States, and it's taught in coaching ed.
Yeah, I know. I agree.
It's awful, and I don't want to get personal here. And those people have produced a lot of 26-foot jumpers, but what
not
does that
beyond.
get you? What does
It
that
gets you
get you?
nowhere. It gets you nowhere.
Yeah,
And they're not even coaching those jumpers into the speed components that are necessary to actually
exactly.
execute it,
And all the kids at the state meet have really cool landing technique. They slide through, but
Oh,
they
yes.
take off.
I agree. So,
That splash looks awesome, I know.
so when you see an athlete that's
I don't know
got
how you feel, Robert, but it was ugly watching,
Okay.
I'll let Coach finish. I'll chime in after.
But all these
Hey, guys,
skills these young people have, we have to still look at what part of that skill is a strength to them.
Yeah.
Or for them. And then how can we then move that strength into what the model is that we want them to perform? And that's where the trick comes. But again, it has to be a buy-in from the coach, and then you have to be consistent.
Yeah.
Consistency, continuity, and longevity are the keys to being successful.
Yeah.
Yep.
Consistency, continuity, and longevity. Longevity suggests repetition, 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 repetition. Consistency means the same thing day in and day out of the skill. And continuity means that you put it together the same way every time. Because we are creatures of habit. We are creatures of repetition. And that's where you teach it, because we're trying to isolate the skill down to a reflex level, not a conscious level.
Right.
Okay, can I just move into two questions from our viewers here? Rita Engelbrecht, are juniors going in as seniors the product of what they have done or what they have not done?
Oh, I love it.
I'm not following that one. I think I am, but I'm not sure. Yeah,
Use
they're
that
referring to
again.
like are they referring to like under 20s competing with seniors, or are they referring to
Well,
like
they're coming from juniors, they're coming into seniors. Are they the product of what they've done or what they've not done?
It's a
Gotcha.
product of what they've done, because there's so much more to be done.
correct?
Okay.
Agreed.
I'd agree.
Okay, well, there's another question here from Michael Thomas. When athletes don't have a strong emotional foundation, but are high-level athletes, how do you progress them?
Can I address that one also? Self-concept becomes the most important product here. And when it says here, when an athlete does not have a strong emotional foundation, it's usually lack of self-concept. And so the foundation of building blocks there is that I can do and I will do, and the commitment to on the spectrum, or the volition spectrum of making choices and decisions are not that I will, I'll try, not that I'll try, I could, I might. It is I will. And so anything that you teach them to do, it is a matter in their thought process of the I will, and from the I will, they will gain the emotional strength and the self-confidence to move forward.
Cool.
A story from an old American football coach. So they're lining, you don't have to know football. One guy's out there and he's just getting his butt kicked, and the quarterback's getting smashed. And the coach comes and he says, Gambetta, get in. I'm just using my name as an example. And he says, I want you to take, and he says, I'll try. And he says, he's trying. And he says, he went to the bench and got somebody else. I will, or will I try?
That's
You
right.
know,
I will.
that I'd love to talk more to Frank and Craig and all of us gray hairs. The difference between good to great is great, or best all time, you know, is that, you know.
Okay, to be cruel about this, when somebody says I'll try, they're building in an excuse already.
Exactly.
That's absolutely right. I agree totally.
Right. So with the one with the least amount of gray, but it's starting to show. I agree with both Craig and Vern, but I'll take a little bit of a tact. I touched on it earlier. These young people have made themselves a false sense of being from social media.
Oh,
And to me, when I read the question, emotions can go many ways, right? It could be, are they personally invested in their sport? Is something going on at home with their parents? Is it a whole family? I mean, there's a lot of other factors that are going on. But I feel like nowadays, on the one hand, athletes are like, oh my gosh, I have 10,000 followers. Awesome. What does that mean? You know what I mean? And on the other side of it, they have peers out there that hide behind keyboards and bash these kids. And so it's just, again, so I feel like, I mean this respectfully, I feel I was at the end of old school. I'm 46 years old. We can't talk to athletes the same way we were talked to back then, or at least how I was. And it's just, and then it's almost having to formulate. I've heard Coach Poole talk on different times that just like a communication strategy, it's much different from young ladies as it is to young men. And then even at the
absolutely.
college level,
Mhm.
you have to be very calculated on how you present things. And so all that being said, the reason I say all that, it's just I feel like these kids live on their phones, and even kids being young adults and young pros. And it's just, I don't know how to separate them from that, because in my opinion, it really inhibits their performance, because they're more worried about, oh my gosh, I got 1,000 likes on this post, on this jump, or how many times have we seen the thing like, hey, wasn't my deal today, I had a headwind and I had a weird step. And it's just like you guys touched on, just excuses. And so again, I'm not a big fan of social media,
Again,
at least in that sense.
it goes back to, I think, again, teaching kids what they can control.
Yeah.
What are they
Right.
in control of?
Mhm.
And they're in control of their own lives. They're in control of their own choices. And so if they choose to be subject to these internet types of things, then they're going to have some really difficult times if they drink it in. And they have a choice not to buy in, or they have
Tell
a
you-
choice to buy in.
Tell you a
Craig,
quick
Craig, I
story.
think the real issue is how early can we help these kids to understand that?
You should be in elementary school.
Yeah.
For that, my 4.5-year-old
absolutely.
granddaughter can work my iPhone
11.
better than me.
Yeah.
Scares
Or take this right here. I can say with 100% certainty, my contemporaries out there have stopped recruiting people because of stuff they have seen on someone's social media.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
I
would
don't
too.
care how good they are.
And
I don't
so
care how good they are.
And what I'm trying to get at is how can we help them control the emotional impact of these things? You
Mhm.
emphasized how many likes they had. The real
Yeah.
problem, Robert, is how many dislikes.
Dislikes.
Correct.
But again, you have,
Correct.
as a coach, you
that's
have to
all-
explore, you have to explore the deep meanings of what some of these things mean. I think this is one of the arts of coaching, that when you sit down with these young people and talk to them, you have to define, what does this really mean? What does this suggest for you? What does it has to do with you? What are your fundamental philosophies? What is your fundamental grounding? What is your fundamental portions of life? And it has to be judged in things like that. You've got to have some point from which to make the judgments. You cannot just fly by the seat of your pants. It just doesn't work. They have to have some commitments.
And I think that's a word, of course, that we could put out to them, but where unfortunately it can lead. A few 2 or 3 years ago, I was asked to speak to the police in the UK, and it was about their deep concern that young male officers were having a rapid increase in the incidence of mental health issues. And
That's a whole bit.
you and I, Craig, would say, grow up, sort yourself out.
Yep,
But you
that's
can't
right.
say that anymore. And why I was brought in is that there's a technique that's used. I stole much of it from a guy called Kerry Evans, who was the chief psychologist with the All Blacks rugby team. And it's a very simple technique that we try to apply to players on the field, but also I try to move into our world when you feel pressure. Pressure or stress is a very interesting thing because it's a personal perception, right? Nobody else can really perceive your stress because it's not their world. So we can't do much about that, but can we give them a tool to deal with it? And the simple tool that I use is step back, step up, step in.
Absolutely.
Which is your point, I think, Craig. Step back, get the perspective. Step up. What is it that's causing this issue? Step in, do something about it.
I agree totally. I'm first base with that one.
Well,
Yep.
but I think we're so afraid today as coaches, as parents, as authority figures, to even talk about pressure, and one of the goalkeeper for the 2018 women's hockey team, some of you guys know Jimmy Ratcliffe. He was the head conditioning. I helped him. And the gal looked like she belonged in the library, not on a hockey court. And they were debating whether to start or not to start her. And she started every game in the Olympic Games and got incredible number of saves to win the gold medal. And they asked her about it, and she says, pressure's power, and I think that as coaches, my mantra is always in track and in swimming was own the finish. So every day we talked about it. It wasn't something you avoided, so that you could learn to embrace the challenge and find out how you dealt with my daughter, who was a really good, decent sprinter and decent soccer player. It was get the butterflies flying in formation. The other day she works big. She has a management position with Amazon. She said, Dad, I'm really nervous to do a position. I said, Peanut, what do you think I'm going to take? She's 44 years old. What do you think? She says, yeah, I'll get the butterflies flying in formation. But you have to address that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and like you said, in all the context that what you said, and yes, it's a different world, but we're not going back, you guys. I mean, this thing here changed our world. I mean, it's the more I become aware of what I can't do, that's available to me, it's scary. And then you look at AI, you know, I mean, oh, it's just mind-boggling. So, but that's okay. If
do
we
with
can
it.
run from it or we can address it, right?
You
And
know, another point along that same line is that in terms of the butterflies, I call it excited anticipation. But
yeah,
that only comes by way of taking care of responsibilities. Again, responsibility is a choice, but too many people are avoiding the responsibility to the foundational principles. So I think that again, the teaching has to come back to the fact that people are responsible for certain things in their life.
yeah,
They are See, the thing we don't play with it here is accountability for those
accountability,
responsibilities.
right?
And we need to get into the fact that they have to be accountable for the responsibilities that they take and that they are committed to, and they do not deviate from the course.
Yeah, amen, amen. I agree.
If I
Right.
can jump in here, we have about 8 minutes before we get to our close, and I want to leave Frank some time to do a wrap up and summarize. I want to first thank you all for great technical presentation to this topic, but I also love the human side that you guys have added to it to help us all understand where we are. You said it great, Vern. With cell phones, what do we do? What are we doing without them? What are we doing with them? Our kids are just mesmerized by some of those things, and we all are having to step out of our comfort zone, us as older and some of us as older coaches, stepping out of our comfort zones of dealing with our present day athletes and even our elite level athletes that are older. And I appreciate you all sharing the human side of things because it gives us all those perspectives to take with us. We have a lot of just general comments in our chat. I appreciate you all giving those comments. Kevin, if you can hear me, in the chat, we can only type responses and the host and the panelists see them, which means Robert and Vern's email address that's been put in the chat, nobody can see that. So if you can help us with that, Kevin, so that the panel,
And
so
then
that
there was also a question above too. I'm sorry.
from David. Yeah, I'm going to go back to that one, David, and let him have that last question before we turn it over to Frank. But Kevin, if you can work on that for us so that we can have these email addresses shared. If you all can bear with me, my guests that are here, the email address for Vern Gambetta is G as in good, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, S as in Sam, the word coach, at gmail.com. There we go. Now you have, you fixed it. Thank you, Kevin, for fixing that. Now you all that are guests, you should be able to see everything that's in the chat with those two email addresses of Robert and Vern, so you can have that. If I can, bear with me, I'm going to go back up to this question that was for Robert, and I think you all can answer it also. And then we're going to turn it over to Frank for a closing. This is David Burnett's question. His question is to Rob. It says, as a new coach in a highly successful program, how do you go about gaining trust in the student athletes in a very short time frame? Also, in what ways do you instill buy-in with the age of the transfer portal and the win now pressures of this sport? That's two questions. We still have 6 minutes. Go ahead and answer those questions, and then we'll turn it over to Frank to close us out.
All right, I'll try to be quick. So there's an old adage, once upon a time I played American football. One of my head coaches used to say, actions speak louder than words. And I think all of us kind of said that in uncertain terms earlier. But coming in, it's no secret I had some pretty big shoes to fill, and Travis Gephardt. Travis and I were buddies, so it's been an easy transition for me in that standpoint. But to answer your question, as you guys can imagine, convincing 15 guys that, hey, I'm the new guy, let's go. It was a little tough in the beginning, if I'm being honest, because literally the only one in the group that I had actually recruited was Vines. So there was 14 guys I had to convince that they needed to stay, and it was the right thing. And then over time, through training. I have a different training philosophy. I could talk about that offline, but all that being said, once we started testing, outside weight room, all this stuff, everyone's like, so basically general prep, we tested. After that, everything was good. Everyone was bought in. Then obviously results at nationals spoke for themselves. And then we just came off an SEC outdoor championship, and then knock on wood, we put it together next week. But in what ways to instill buy-in, I have the luxury of being at Arkansas, like Coach Bucknam. I mean, the culture here is it's win or on to the next one type of a thing. I mean, not to make it trivial, but that's what it is. Like, the expectation here is no man is bigger than the team. It's a team culture, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If that's not what they want to do, we will show them where the compliance office is at. But to answer your question, as far as the do well now or they hit the portal, knock on wood, fortunately I haven't had to deal with that at any of my stops. But at the same time, just from hearing what my peers have to say, it's a slippery slope. There's a lot of club coaches out there shopping former athletes. There's a lot of intermediaries doing things that aren't very becoming of other stuff. But the portal, as we say, the portal giveth and also taketh away. I'll leave it on that.
Well, don't you think it comes down to you have to be yourself? I mean, I'll reflect back 54 years ago. I went from junior high to Stanford. And the kid, I was 26 years old, and I go from Santa Barbara winning a city championship to it was the Pac-8. And you have to, I was reflecting on that the other day because I talked to one of the athletes, and sure, I had to prove myself all fall, and everything, but I had to be myself, and they had never had a coach that even was, all the coaches they'd had were talking down to them, and that instead of, that. And I thought, God, I get to talk to guys that are 21, 22 that have a degree of maturity, and they're going to ask really good questions and stuff like that. And that's the way you approach it. That's always, I mean, I think that's life. That's as we go through, our careers, or there's always, every move you make, you have to prove yourself, so yeah, it's interesting.
Okay, Wendy, shall I summarize?
Yes, I think it is time. Again, thank you all. I'm Wendy Trevelyan, your moderator, and I'm the Women's Track and Field Chair for USA. I'm glad to have been invited back to be a part of this forum and be your moderator. We'll allow Frank to give us a close and a summary.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks very much indeed, Wendy, for your time today and making time today. I think this has been an outstanding 90 minutes, absolutely outstanding. Sincere thanks to Craig, Robert, and Vern, of course, to Kevin for setting up the whole setup, and of course to our ladies in the background, Sheila and Senna, for making sure the promotion has been in place. And thanks also to all of you who've been tuned in. Really appreciate you being here. Tell your friends. Let them be part of this next time around. Well, to my summary, first of all, going through the things that I learned from this, go back to basics at least once per year. I think, second point, how does the athlete see the world? What are their experience? What are their movement patterns and so on? Let the athletes discover. And again, in doing so, you as a coach will learn a little bit more what their movement potential is and so on. Keep it simple. Tell the athlete what it is you want to achieve, and with a little bit of guidance, leave it up to them to work out how. Adapt your style to the athlete first, then get the athlete to adapt to you. Get the language right. And the way to summarize that, know your purpose, know your athletes,
Know your sport,
know yourself, and know your stuff, right? I think that's, I'll wrap sport in the stuff there, Craig. The prioritized strengths, the way I've always seen it is the priority is to coach the athlete's strengths, because that's why they're there in the first place. You only coach weaknesses if it interferes with the strength, or if it interferes with the strengths of other people in the team. When it comes to change, and you all indirectly referred to this, there are two skills you have to have. You've got to be able to teach, and you've got to be able to sell. The teaching part, I think, for most coaches is pretty straightforward, but we've got to find the art of selling a concept to get the athletes buy-in, because the process we're pursuing is to create the right learning environment for the athlete to take ownership out there. A model for the young athlete may not actually be the right one for a senior athlete. A critical one that's actually been mentioned several times over: don't copy. Don't copy. Why? Because something I learned from a guy called Jon Tiriac. He said to me, Frankie, every technique is a compensation.
Mhm.
It's a compensation created by the athlete in front of you. Vin Walsh said to us, take the athlete 80% of the way and step back. And maybe our real art in coaching is how we deal with that 20%, because that's the athlete as a unique person. And that's the real craft, we can't let them drift so far off track that they're never going to get back to the biomechanical principles. But I think the real art is to learn how we can coach the compensation. And finally, we had the language was mentioned, and I loved your example, Craig. Language was mentioned. I remember some time ago, one coach saying in a small hot debrief we were having, saying, let's make up a name, Fred across there. I had to tell him to be more courageous, to be braver out there. And the second coach said, I wouldn't like you saying that to me. And I looked at him and said, why? He said, I think you were calling me a coward. So, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And I think that the art of getting the right language, the art of creating the right analogy, the right story that creates the buy-in,
Yeah.
is what we're all about.
Yeah.
And one final part about language is, I know you've heard me saying this 1,000 times, Vern, so apologies. We've got to create a culture of constructive candor, being straight with people, not
Yeah.
going around the houses. If you don't have candor, you do not have honesty. If you don't have honesty, you don't have trust. And on the other side, and a word that was mentioned several times through, if you don't have candor, you don't have accountability. And if you don't have accountability, you don't get respect.
Mhm.
I hope that makes sense, guys. Listen,
Yes.
thank you so much. That's been a wonderful, wonderful session. I think the best I've enjoyed. We're doing this for a number of years now. I'm sure we'll have you back, and for sure, this topic is going to be extended. Thanks very much indeed.